Okay, I'd like to do our scripture reading this morning. It's going to be from the book of Isaiah, chapter 5, verses 8 through 24. Isaiah 5, verses 8 through 24. If you need a Bible, raise your hand, we'll get one to you. Isaiah chapter 5, verses 24 through 8 through 24. Page 717. If you have a Bible from the church. Okay, we'll begin reading in verse 8 of Isaiah chapter 5. Woe unto them that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place, that they may be placed alone in the midst of the earth. In mine ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair without inhabitant. Yea, 10 acres of vineyard shall yield one bath, and the seed of an homer shall yield an ephah. Woe unto them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, and that continue until night, till wine inflame them. And the harp and the viol, and the tabret, and the pipe, and wine are in their feast. But they regard not the work of the Lord, neither consider the operation of his hands. Therefore my people are gone into captivity, because they have no knowledge, and their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. Therefore hell hath enlarged herself, and opened her mouth without measure, and their glory and their multitude, and their pomp, and he that rejoices shall descend into it. And the mean man shall be brought down, and the mighty man shall be humbled, and the eyes of the lofty shall be humbled. But the Lord of hosts shall be exalted in judgment, and God that is holy shall be sanctified in righteousness. Then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. Woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin, as it were, with a cart rope, that say, Let him make speed, and hasten his work, that we may see it, and let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh and come, that we may know it. Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, that put darkness for light, and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. Woe unto them that are wise in their own eyes, and prudent in their own sight. Woe unto them that are mighty to drink wine, and men of strength to mingle strong drink, which justify the wicked for reward, and take away the righteousness of the righteous from him. Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble, and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their roots shall be as rottenness, and their blossoms shall go up as dust, because they have cast away the law of the Lord of hosts, and despised the word of the Holy One of Israel.
Don't forget, a man who was going to have surgery, and his son was the doctor. He calls his son over, he says, Son, don't be nervous. Just do your best. And remember, don't forget, if it doesn't go well and something happens to me, your mother's going to come and live with you and your family. Don't forget. And the reason I titled this was kind of going on from where we left off, really where we came from. I was talking with Audrey this morning. I said, are you a valley girl? She said, oh, yeah, I'm a bear. Kind of bear. And where she came from. And she's a valley girl. And what is interesting is throughout the scripture that God always used a memorial to remind them of something that was going on at the time. We have memorials. They're to remind us. Every year we have a birthday. Remind us we're getting old. 9/11, we have a memorial to remind us of what happened on September 11th. Last week we had Memorial Day to remind us of those that had given their lives for the freedoms that we have. And so we have a constant of memorials that are around us to remind us of things that we need to remember. But I'm finding that People today don't know where we came from. They don't know anything about our beginnings and how our country came about and what caused it and where they came from, and how that years and years and years ago people decided that they wanted the freedom to worship the way they wanted to, and they set out to come to this new country. We called them pilgrims. And when they were on their way, they got sidetracked. They ended up in Holland for 12 more years. They were being persecuted simply because they wanted the right. And then after 12 years, they headed out for America. You know, Christopher Columbus was very interesting. When Christopher Columbus got here, he didn't know where he was. When he left, he didn't know where he had been. And he did it all with somebody else's money. To me, that's really, really interesting. But they came to this place, and they got here right before winter. And they made the statement, they said, you know, it might be better if we go back, because winter is going to be here and we really haven't had a chance to prepare. But they decided to stay. Over half of them died that first winter. But they felt that it was worth it. You know, we were reading this morning in John, it said, he that saves his life shall lose it, and he that loses his life for my sake shall save it. What are we giving our life for? I had a video that I sent to Joseph, and I thought, is this interesting? How many, when you were in high school, had American history? Some of you remember that, American history, what that was all about? Joseph, did you get that video? Huh? The one with the car? No, it was a video of that I had sent on a couple of days ago, and it was an interview of college students and asking questions, simple questions. I thought they were simple, but some of their answers were outrageous. It was beyond me. In Isaiah chapter 5, Joseph will look for that. And the Lord in Isaiah exhorts Israel and reminds them or calls them his vineyard. God gives them 6 woes. You know, and he warns them of some of the things that are going on that shouldn't be on. He gave them six of them. Starting in verse 8, he talks about them as being grapes, and then he calls them wild grapes. Wild grapes are sour. In verse 4, he says, what could have been done more to my vineyard that I have not done it? Wherefore, when I looked that it should bring forth grapes, brought it forth wild grapes. And now go to, I will tell you what I will do to my vineyard. I will take away the hedge thereof, and it shall be eaten up and broken down, and the walls thereof, and it shall be trodden down. And I will lay it waste. It shall not be penned nor digged, but there shall come up briars and thorns. I will also command the clouds that there rain no more upon it. For the vineyard of the Lord of hosts is the house of Israel. And the men of Judah his pleasant plant. And he looked for judgment, but behold oppression, for righteousness, and behold a cry. And he said, woe, because of what they were going in. And it's interesting because God was constantly warning Israel, knowing what they were going to do before they did it. He warned them and they didn't respond. I want you to go to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8. Deuteronomy chapter 8, page 226. Verse 2 to start with. He said, "And thou shalt remember all the way which the Lord thy God led thee these 40 years in the wilderness, to humble thee and to prove or test thee, to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not." He reminded them of certain things. In verse 4, he said, "The raiment waxed not old upon thee, neither did thy foot swell these 40 years. Thou shalt also consider in your heart that as a man chastened his son, so God, the Lord thy God, chastens thee." You know, when we talk about the gospel and the simplicity of the gospel, how that Christ came, how he died for sins, let me just share this just very quickly. You and me, this is you and me, represents you and me. This is sin. God loves us, hates our sin. Sin separates us from God. If we're going to get to heaven, we have to be perfect. Heaven is a perfect place. We're not. God said, "I love you. I hate the sin. I'm going to send my son, Jesus Christ. He's going to come to the earth. He's going to take that sin on himself. He's going to pay for it, and he's going to give us his righteousness and give us heaven as his children." And, you know, sometimes people will say to me, "Well, that sounds so simple." It is simple. And so he says, "Well, then that means that you can live as you please." Listen, as God's son, you cannot live as you please. He said there to his children there, he said, "Thou shalt also consider in your heart that as a man chastens his son, so the Lord thy God will chasten you." You know, my children didn't tell me, "Well, I'm going to live as I please on you." No. And as a young man, I tried to live as I pleased, but my dad wouldn't allow that. I remember one time my dad chased me down and caught me pretty fast. I was fast, but he caught me. You know, I didn't want to come home, and he says, "Come on in." And I didn't want to go in because I knew what was coming. And so God is saying, you know, he says, you can't run from me. You can try to live as you please. But God, the Bible says, God chastens us. In the book of Hebrews, he said, "For whom the Lord loves," not hates, he loves, he chastens and scourges every son whom he receives. And chastening is a sign that you're a son. He said, if you don't get it, he says, you probably don't belong. So God says, he says, you're not going to get away. And so he's giving these instructions. He said, "I want to remember you," he said, "that the clothes that you wore never wore out." That's nice. That's the real perma-press. You know, you ladies get permanents, but they're really not permanents, they're temporaries. Because you have to have it again. Yeah? So don't tell your husband, "I'm going to get a permanent." You tell him, "I'm going to get a temporary." Okay? And then he says, "Your feet never swelled up." You know what happens when you walk a lot? Your feet swell. And he said, your feet never swelled. Your shoes never wore out. Verse 6, he says there in Deuteronomy, he says, "Therefore thou shalt keep the commandments of the Lord thy God, to walk in his ways and to fear him. And the Lord thy God bringeth thee unto a good land, a land of brooks, of water, of fountains, of depths that spring out in the valleys and hills, a land of wheat and barley and vines and fig trees and pomegranates, a land of oil, olive, and honey, a land in where you will eat bread without scarceness. Thou shalt not lack anything in it, the land whose stones are iron, and out of those hills thou mayest dig brass. And when you have eaten and you're full, then thou shalt bless the Lord thy God for the good land which he has given thee." And so God established memorials to remind them where they had been, where they came from. Did you find that, Joseph? You did find that. Okay. I want to show you where we're coming from and what's happening in our society. Joseph, would you go ahead and show that?
We're here on our home campus at Texas Tech to see just how much our fellow students know about their country.
Who won the Civil War?
We did? The South?
Like the one in 1965 or what Civil War?
Who won it? Who was even in it?
Who was in it? Just tell me who was in it.
Ooh, I don't know. Why you make me do this?
Who won the Civil War?
Yeah. Oh my God. Hey, I'm drawing a blank. It's one of those things. I feel like I'm on the Jimmy Kimmel show.
America? I don't know.
That's the Confederates, right? I have no clue.
The Union. The North.
Yes.
Okay.
Who is the vice president? Is that like a trick question? Nope. Okay. I don't know.
Don't know.
I have no idea.
Of right now? I don't know.
What's his name? Oh my gosh. I have his name in my, I have space in my head.
I have no idea. I have no idea. Oh no.
Joe Biden.
Yes. Okay, who did we gain our independence from?
These are horrible.
I have no idea.
Do you know what year we happened to?
Absolutely not.
I couldn't tell you.
It's like 1677 or something like that.
What show is Snooki on?
Jersey Shore.
The Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore.
Jersey Shore.
Who is Brad Pitt married to?
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie.
Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie.
And who was he married to before that?
I think it was Jennifer Aniston.
Jennifer Aniston. Jennifer Aniston.
Jennifer Aniston.
Awesome. Thank you.
Does that tell you something, guys? Who did we get our independence from? Britain, United Kingdom. Who won the Civil War? Texas did. No. You know, it really ought to cause us to think. What are they being taught in school? If they're being taught anything about American history. Who was our first president? People didn't know things that they ought to know. Where you live, where you're from, how we got here, how the price was paid. And they don't know. And I think it's on purpose. I think we're in a huge spiritual war. I think that as believers, we need to wake up. If we don't start standing for what we believe in, they know more about what was on TV than the history of our country. And you know what? That doesn't make a flip. I don't care who Brad Pitt married. I don't care who his first wife was or his second. I know the kid in Hollywood who came home. He said, "Who's my dad this week?" They don't. It doesn't click. But God established memorials, and He did it on purpose. We do communion or we do Passover to remind us of what the Lord Jesus did for us, how He shed His blood. We have Memorial Day to remind us of the soldiers that paid the price so that we could, I guess, watch TV. I don't know. But we need to understand, like I talked about last week when Thomas Jefferson penned out the Declaration of Independence, declaring why we want to be independent. There were 28 things that he mentioned, and we discussed 4 of them that were major. They don't know what's happening. Look, if you would, and we're going to get back to Deuteronomy. We're going to go to Isaiah, but I want you to look in Exodus chapter 12, verse 14, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Go back a couple of books from Deuteronomy. Exodus 12. Let's start in verse 12. Page 84. For I will pass through the land of Egypt this night, and I will smite all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast, against all the gods of Egypt. Remember I told you that there were 10 plagues in Egypt, and every plague was directed at an Egyptian deity, Egyptian god, just for God to prove that he was God. And he says there, against the gods of Egypt, and I will execute judgment. I am the Lord. And the blood shall be to you for a token upon the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and the plague shall not be upon you to destroy you when I smite the land of Egypt. Some people used to say, well, the angel of death. It was not the angel of death. It was God himself. He said, I will pass over you. I will smite. God himself. Then he says in verse 14, and this day shall be unto you for a what? A memorial. And you shall keep it a feast to the Lord throughout your generations. You shall keep it a feast by an ordinance forever. And so God established what we call Passover, we call communion, and it's to be done until he comes the second time. He said forever. And even today, the Jews celebrate Passover. It was a memorial to remind them of how he confronted the gods of Egypt, and how that he said exactly what he said was going to happen, and it happened. And he said, I want you to remember this. And we find out in other different places in Joshua and Esther and other, there are 30 plus verses that talk about memorials that God set up. When they crossed the Jordan into the land, they took 12 large stones and put them in the middle of the Jordan for the 12 tribes that went across the Jordan. There was constant reminders. And he says, you tell your kids about this. Remind them, what has happened. Let's go back to the book of Deuteronomy, chapter 8. Verse 11. The first thing, the warning. Beware that thou forget. The word forget means to be oblivious. Beware that thou forget not the Lord thy God in not keeping his commandments and his judgments and his statutes, which I commanded thee this day. Lest when you are eaten, when you have eaten, and you're full, and you've built goodly houses, and you dwelt therein, and when thy herds and thy flocks multiply, and thy silver and thy gold is multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, that in your heart you be lifted up, and you forget that the Lord thy God, which brought thee forth out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage. And so he says, when you are prospering, this is what he's saying, when everything is going well, we've got money in the bank, our kids are finally behaving, and we have all of these things going for us, you forget God. And he's saying this because it's a tendency for us to do that. We get busy, things are going well, we don't have time to pray, we're just, he says, watch out. Don't be oblivious to the fact that when things are going well, that we need to remember where we came from. This Jewish couple, Shirley and Abe, retired from New York and moved to Miami Beach. When I was growing up, Al Capone had a house on Miami Beach. Okay? Had a big fence around it. It was right on the main dragon. And you go to the fork, you go this way and that way. And in the middle of this was his house. Okay? And back there, when we first moved to Miami, they wouldn't allow Jews on Miami Beach. And now they own it. Okay? In fact, it is called Little Israel. Interesting. And so Shirley and Abe retired from New York to Miami Beach, to Little Israel. They're getting ready to go out to dinner. Shirley says, Abe, darling, he says, do you want me to wear my Chanel suit or my Gucci? Abe says, I don't care. A few minutes later, Shirley, Abe, dear, should I wear my Cartier watch or my Rolex? Abe says, I don't care. A few more minutes pass and Shirley says, Abe, love, shall I wear my 5-carat pearl diamond ring or my 6-carat round diamond ring with the bouquets in it? Abe says, Shirley, I really don't care what you wear, but if you don't get moving, we're going to miss the early bird special. You know, where did we come from? You know, that we need to realize where we came from. You know, the things that we did, and sometimes we say, well, you tell your kids, I don't want you to go through what I went through, but what you went through is what made you who you are. Homer, how many restaurants did you go through before you got to Don Pepe's? I remember first it was a bakery, and then there was a little place over here, and now you got a really nice place. Nice head. Huh? 4. And I remember going over there, just a little place, a hole in the wall. And I remember Homer saying, you know, pray for me. He says, we're going to make it big. And they did. It's a fine place to eat. But you know, what it took to get there, it just didn't happen. It was a lot of work. To learn all the things that you learned, just, you know, I was reminded of Steve, and what was that guy's name who came from Harlingen to help you? The guy who had the garage when we had a problem with the bus. Yeah. That feller, huh? Just testing to see if you're getting old or not. Okay. But you know what is interesting? This guy had about, 30 years of experience of dealing with it. We had a problem with our bus. It took us a year to fix. Couldn't figure out what was wrong with it. And between these two guys, they got together and they tried this and they tried that. And it was like Thomas Edison. They said, didn't you get discouraged when you were doing the light bulb and how many things failed? He said, no. He said, I know 700 things that don't work. You learn something from that experience, and that's what builds character. He never quit. If he would have quit, we'd be in the dark. But he never quit. Tried one thing, that didn't work. Tried another thing, it didn't work. Tried another, till he found out what worked. But it was that experience, that we got to. Yeah, we're prospering now. But it wasn't that way when we began. I remember eating peanut butter and jelly for a couple of weeks. Not that my wife can't cook, but things were tight. And God blessed. But it's that tough times is what build character in us. And it'll build character in your kids if you allow them to go through it. And so God says to the children of Israel, he says, don't forget when everything is going good, he said, don't forget where you came from. Don't forget God, because that's a tendency. After 9/11, boy, people flocked to the churches. Then all of a sudden, well, everything's okay, God. It's like the guy who was falling off the roof. He cries out to God, God, help! And a nail catches his britches and keeps him from falling off. He said, never mind, God, this nail's got me. You know, how quickly we forget where we came from and what. And so God knew that. And they're in the midst of the wilderness, and God said, I just want to remind you. And God put them in the wilderness just to show them that he could provide for them in a place where really people could not survive or live. He took care of their clothes. He took care of their food. He just said, I want one thing from you, just one thing, the same thing he wants from us. Trust me. The guy who fell over the cliff and he was hanging on his limb and he's crying out for help, help, help! Somebody help me, God help me. And God says, yes? He said, oh, help me, please. And he said, let go. And it was a quietness. Is there anybody else up there? You know, it's hard for us to just do this, to let go. And let God do what he does best. I don't care who you are. God wants to be an integral part of your life. And so he says one of the things you have to watch out is for prosperity. Because then we think we're in control and we don't need God. The next thing that sets in is pride. But you know, God reminds them. I call them precious memories. Prosperity, then precious memories. Look, if you would, in verse 15. He said, who led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, where there were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water? Who brought thee forth water out of a rock, a flint? Who fed thee in the wilderness with manna which thy fathers knew not, that he might humble thee and that he might prove thee, to do thee good at thy latter end? And then you say in your heart, my power and the might of mine hand has gotten me this wealth. And so he says, he reminds them of those precious memories. He said, who got you through all of this? Who gave you water out of a rock? You ever try getting water out of a rock? Pretty tough. You know, not like a sponge. You just don't. And he said, who provided for you daily with the manna? He says, you never know anything about. That was the perfect health food. You know, people today, they want to live longer. I don't know if I want to live longer or not. You know? I remember Jane's mom, she was always encouraging us to eat oat bran because it's good for you. You know, she would always have her oat bran with her cereal. And Jane brought her a sticker, a bumper sticker for her car. It says, take your vitamins, eat your oat bran, do your exercises, and die. That's what we're going to do. Pretty simple. And so God reminded precious memories of where they had been and how God provided for them. And sometimes God has to remind us, I am still your provider. Yeah. Sometimes when people say, you know, well, I need this and that. Well, have you talked to God about it? You know, pray about what your needs are. Because God said, I'll take care of your needs. And then he says, watch out for pride there. He says in verse 17, when you say, look what I've done, it's me. You know, Muhammad Ali just died. Remember, he's the greatest. And he told you, remember, he would tell you he's the greatest. You know, God's the greatest, not Muhammad Ali. Changed his name. He wouldn't go to war. He liked to beat up people, but he wouldn't kill them. You know. Verse 17, and you say in your heart, my power and my mind, the might of my hand has gotten me this wealth. So he takes the credit. Then he says in verse 18, but you shall remember the Lord thy God, for it is he that what? Gives thee power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he sware unto your fathers this day. And it shall be that if you do forget the Lord your God, and walk after other gods, and serve them, and worship them, he said, I'm telling you, I testify against you this day, you're going to perish. The word, again, as the nations which the Lord destroys before your face, so shall you perish, because you would not be obedient unto the voice of the Lord your God. And that word perish means there's no place to run to. You're come to the end, and there's nowhere to go. Remember the Lone Ranger in Tano? They were surrounded by 10,000 Indians, and the Lone Ranger says to Tano, Tano, what are we going to do? And Tano says, what do you mean we, paleface? You know? When we come to the end and there's nowhere to go, nowhere to run, you know. And so God says, watch out for prosperity, precious memories, memorials. Remember what I did in the wilderness for you. Then don't come with this pride that you did it all yourself. And then you're going, if you don't, you're going to perish. Let's go to the book of Isaiah now. Isaiah is the result that they didn't listen to God. So God says, here's what's going to happen. The first woe that he deals with is with their covetousness. He said, woe unto them, verse 8, that join house to house, that lay field to field, till there be no place that they may be placed, alone in the midst of the earth. In my ears, said the Lord of hosts, of a truth many houses shall be desolate, even great and fair, without inhabitant. Yes, 10 acres of a vineyard shall yield 1 bath. In other words, 10 acres will yield 6 gallons of grape juice, later wine. In other words, it's not very productive. They're trying to make it work, and it's not working, and God says, you're going to do this, and this is what's going to be the result. You know, if you do what God says to do, it'll work. Some people don't believe it. It'll work. God will multiply. I'm reminded of this guy in Tennessee his wife was having children, and calls the doctor. The doctor came to the house, and there was no electricity, and so the doctor hands the father to be a lantern, and he said, here, hold this high so I can see what I'm doing. So he goes in there, and she delivers one little boy, and great. And then the next thing you know, the doctor says, whoa, wait a minute. And he pulls out another one. Twins. Whoa, a Jacob and Orion. Yeah. And the doctor says, whoa, wait a minute, get that light a little bit closer. And he pulls out the third one. Triplets. And the old Tennessee boy looking down at him, he said, hey, Doc, you think the light's attracting them? You know? You know? You know? And you know what? If we do what's right, God will multiply what we have. He has a habit of doing that. To doing your best, doing what you can, and God multiplies. And so he says, watch out for that covetousness. The next thing is the drunkenness. Verse 11, he said, woe to them that rise up early in the morning, that they may follow strong drink, that continue until night. till wine inflamed them. And so these guys they're not sober, they're drunk. And so people are looking for something and yet not finding what they're thinking they're looking for. I see this today. People, you go to Facebook, you do the thing on Facebook, and sometimes you'll run into someone and they have a ton of selfies about themselves, all about themselves. The whole thing, selfies. Amazing. Covetousness, drunkenness, and all the way, verse 17, it says, then shall the lambs feed after their manner, and the waste places of the fat ones shall strangers eat. In other words, to just ruin. Verse 13, it says, therefore my people are gone into captivity because they have no knowledge. And their honorable men are famished, and their multitude dried up with thirst. And and this is typical of the Jews. In Romans chapter 10, it says, they have a zeal for God, but it's not according to knowledge. It's not according to truth. They're going about to establish their own righteousness, but they haven't submitted themselves to the righteousness of God. And so this is nothing new. And even today, when you go to Israel, and boy, they want to rebuild that third temple, and it's causing chaos because they want to build it on the Temple Mount, and you have 2 mosques on top of the Temple Mount. And when we were there, they were playing soccer on it and so on, and it just irritates the Jews, and they do it on purpose to irritate the Jews because they were misusing the Temple Mount. Kids with soccer balls kicking and so on. And the Jews are complaining. This is a sacred place. This is where we want to build our temple. And the Muslims are saying, no, you're not going to build a temple on the Mount. No, ain't no way. And man, they're determined. They're going to build it there. See, but they want to do it their way. It's according, they have no knowledge, no truth. They're just seeking to do it the way they want to. Well, that's the way it was, and so on. On and on and on. So that was the next thing, drunkenness. Then there was carelessness. That was the third woe. Carelessness. Woe unto them that draw iniquity with cords of vanity, and sin, as it were, with a cart rope. They say, let him make speed and hasten his work, that we may see it, and let the counsel of the Holy One of Israel draw nigh, and so that we may know it. Carelessness. And then there was deception. Woe unto them that call evil good, and good evil, and put darkness for light, and light for darkness, that put bitter for sweet, and sweet for bitter. It's exactly what they're doing today in our country. Hundreds of thousands of people upset because they killed a gorilla. And we're destroying babies by the hundreds of thousands. And they're worried because they killed a gorilla. They used to call me Gorilla Marilla.